So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on the archaeology of King's Place. I'm delighted to say that we're going to be hearing from 4 of my colleagues today on their initial work and findings following the excavations that were taking place. As a warning, just to reiterate, hopefully you will have seen, but the presentation will contain images of human remains. So just to kind of flag that for you. But without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Eben. So Eben was one of our supervisors on the site, and he'll be walking us through and sharing the overview of those excavations. So Eben, over to you.
Hello, good afternoon. So yeah, my name is Eben Cooper and I'm a senior archaeologist at Mola. And I was one of 2 senior archaeologists that led the field work at King's Place. So where are we? So the location of the site, we're in the London Borough of Southwark. And the site is located on the corner of Borough High Street, where it meets Harper Road. So you can see there on the map, the site outlined in a black border. And it's just south of Southwark Police Station, and to the southwest, bordering Swan Street, there is a new block of flats that we will refer to later on in the presentation. So the site itself, we undertook a programme of archaeological monitoring and recording, which is often referred to as a watching brief. This was carried out on behalf of Unite students working with RG Group. And we undertook the field work from the 27th of February 2025 through to the 25th of April, and there were some additional works later on in the year. Previously to the work that we undertook, there were several evaluations, archaeological evaluations, undertaken both by Mola and another company, Pre-Construct Archaeology. In those works, several building footings of post-medieval date were uncovered, and a large agricultural soil, which we'll come to in a bit. But importantly, no Roman remains were particularly identified during any of those works. So the results of what we found during the archaeological monitoring. So the earliest remains found on site were of Roman date, and we have evidence of early Roman ditches, probably of agricultural use, which seem to predate the area which is later used as a cemetery. The enclosure ditches date quite broadly, but they stratigraphically appear to be earlier than the cemetery. Then later in the Roman period, the area seems to be used as a burial ground, and we start to pick up timber coffins, chalk burials, and funerary structures. We have a site plan which shows some of these things that we've picked up. So you can see to the west of the site, we've got one of those enclosure ditches in that sort of light beige colour. And then to the east of the project, we found burials, ditches, and the remains of what may be a boundary wall, possibly enclosing the cemetery itself. Of note on this slide, outside of the project boundary in black, we have the results of what was discovered by Pre-Construct Archaeology in 2017, and this is nationally important remains of a Roman mausoleum, Roman road, and a stone sarcophagus. Now, Roman burials tend to be buried outside of the city walls, and often alongside roads, and so we can see that the burials that we've picked up on this project are situated lovely and nice and close to that Roman road picked up by Pre-Construct Archaeology. And so some of the features that we've been picking up on this project, we've got burials. So we've picked up about 14 inhumation burials and 1 cremation. We have, there we go, and these burials come in all manner of forms and positions, and I'm sure Don will talk about that later on in this presentation. We also have several ditches, which you can see to the bottom right. There's an example of one of the enclosure ditches. And in the central map, you can start to see the layout of the burials that we picked up in this project. of different orientations, and those ditches that are running underneath and crisscrossing, showing that there's several different phases of Roman activity on this site. The darker coloured linear feature that you can see to the bottom is what appears to be a robbed out Roman wall, which we suspect is possibly a boundary for the cemetery itself. And some of the other things that we've picked up, funerary structures, we have a possible cist or stone-lined burial. You can see on the left, though no human remains are identified with these stones, it appears to be some form of lining, and we've got a possible cheese press, which will be spoken about later on, which was found towards the top of one of our agricultural ditches. So post the Roman activity on site, we see a dip in what goes on, and we start to pick up this thick garden soil deposit. This deposit was over 1 meter thick, this dark, soily earth, which shows this sort of change of land use going on the site. And activity only starts to pick up in the late 16th century. To put this into perspective, Southwark is only just becoming more urbanized in this time. So after the Roman period, we start to see a decline in activity going on, and then Southwark slowly expands. And so we're starting to pick up this expansion through the form of brick walls, cesspits, and drains. We found 2 brick-lined cesspits dating to the 17th and 18th century, and these we suspect are associated to the Horseshoe Inn, which we see on maps. And equally across the site, we start to see industrial activity of the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. Some of these industrial activities took the form of, we had these circular lined pits, which you can see to the northeast on the map here. There was a large deposit of disarticulated horsebone towards the centre, and you can start to see the shapes of the rectangular cesspits and wall lines on this map. Something of note was a large deposit placed in 2 places of industrial pottery vessels with a glaze on the inside, and these are rather obscure and mysterious objects that no one is quite sure of their purpose, but they have some form of industrial purpose. Equally on the site, we started to pick up lots of glass soda bottles and various other bits of waste, as well as evidence of a 20th century pen industry, which again will be spoken about later on. And so some of those images of what we've been finding, so we've got some large pits there on the left. To the top right, we've got a barrel well, which is a common sort of post-medieval feature where you sink a cask or a barrel into the ground, and you can see archaeologically, you can pick up the rusted hoop left over in the barrel where the staves have gone away. And to the bottom right is a great example of the layers of this project, where we've got post-medieval walls sat on top of that dark garden soil, and you may just be able to see at either ends of that 1 meter scale, the stripy bar in the center of the image, we're picking up the remains of some Roman burials to the left and to the right. But in the foreground is a large cluster of 19th and 20th century pottery and glass. So we really had a really mixed survival of the Roman archaeology, and equally of post-medieval and later archaeology going on the site. So that is a brief overview of everything that we found so far, and we'll be hearing a bit more in detail about the finds in particular.
Thank you, Kat. So I am Charlotte Byrne, and I am Senior Roman and Iron Age pottery specialist at Mola, and I was lucky enough to look at this assemblage. So moving on to the Roman pottery, there were a total of 379 sherds recovered from across 29 contexts, and the total weight of the assemblage was 10,617 grams, which equates to 10.62 kilograms. And just to kind of give you a bit of an idea of how heavy that is and how much pottery that is, it's the in the image on the slide, it's equivalent to just over 10 small bags of sugar. There seemed to be a relatively high level of fragmentation in the assemblage, and of the 379 sherds, they come from an estimated 269 vessels. Some of the contexts contain a mixture of early and later Roman material. As Eben said, there seems to be quite a lot of mixing within the site, because some of the Roman pottery is residual in the medieval context as well. But despite this, there is a small cluster of contexts which date to the early 2nd century, and another kind of small cluster which date to the 3rd or 4th century. And as I've said, some of this is residual in the medieval context, but the exact kind of extent of the residuality will become clearer after the final phasing is complete, which is part of the next stage of work that we'll do. This later Roman period, as Eben mentioned, correlates with the mausoleum structure and sarcophagus recovered from the excavations from the 25 to 29 Harper Road site. Although the Roman pottery assemblage is relatively small, the range of pottery recovered is quite typical of a London assemblage, with wares including amphora, Samian, black burnished wares, and a variety of different forms, including jars, bowls, dishes, flagons, lids, and interestingly, a vessel that is often referred to as a cheese press, but in this case, it may be more accurate to describe it as a strainer or colander type vessel. So as can be seen from the images on the slide, it's quite a shallow vessel, almost kind of dish-like, with concentric rings, raised grooves on the interior and pierced holes in the wall of the vessel, which would have been done before the vessel was actually fired in the kiln. The presence of a complete vessel is unusual, and as explained from the image, from the site image, the vessel appears to have been kind of carefully deposited in relation to this ditch cut. It was excavated under lab conditions in order to preserve any possible cremated bones or artifacts in case it did end up being a cremation vessel. However, none were recovered. This doesn't mean that there isn't some sort of depositional significance to the placement of the vessel in relation to this ditch, and further research will be undertaken for parallels of such deposition of strainer type vessels. The vessel selection here is interesting, as pots such as these had specific functions in food or drink preparation as kitchen vessels as opposed to serving and dining vessels. The fabric clay is grog tempered, and if we can pop back a bit, sorry. It's grog tempered, and what's interesting about this example, other than its deposition, is that if you look at the images on the kind of in the middle lower, no, on the right of the slide, then these are some colour-coded examples of cheese presses from Peterborough, or the Peterborough area. And as you can see, the ridges and the concentric circles in these are really quite defined and much more prominent, whereas the ones on our vessel are a lot smaller and shorter. An additional difference is that you can see the piercings are in the base of this vessel, of the Peterborough type vessels, whereas looking at the one from King's Place, they've been made in the vessel wall, and this may suggest a different purpose than a cheese press, and hence kind of why it might be more of a colander or strainer type vessel. Next slide, please. Thank you. The Pierce strainer wasn't the only interesting and significant find from the site. There was also a particularly intriguing cremation, which you can see on this slide at various stages of the process and the recovery, from being in the ground to the lab and then into an X-ray machine. As shown in the site image, the deposition of the cremation vessel, you can see that it's a large jar and a ring-necked flagon on the right-hand side there, as part of as an accessory vessel. The jar is 250 millimeters tall and is a probable local white slipped fabric. The flagon is a small squat globular type in an oxidized fabric, and as I said, it's got ring neck, but we'll see that a bit closer up in later pictures. Even in the images on the left of the vessels in the ground, you can see a small section of a third vessel peeking out, and it is in fact a mortarium. So these vessels are large mixing bowls which were deliberately roughened on the interior by adding grits of sand or flint or different materials, in order to use them for grinding or for preparation of certain foods. And they often have spouts for pouring, which again define them as a distinctively kind of kitchen or food preparation vessel. So unfortunately this one isn't complete. However, as we can see in the images and quite nicely in the X-ray, if you look on the right hand side, you can see that it appears to have been positioned with the flange tucked neatly over the rim of the jar, suggesting that it was used as some sort of covering or lid for the cremation vessel. Also in the X-ray, there are some curved lines inside the vessel which are intriguing and are particularly unusual when you find out what they are. So if we go to the next slide. Following the X-rays, the vessel was sent for excavation in the lab, and these images are from during the excavation, where it was the soil was taken out in spits, which are little defined layers, which are carefully recorded and photographed. On the left, you can see that the cremation vessel you can see the jar from above, and you can also see what was causing that funny curved line on the X-ray, and inside is another lid, which is an actual lid meant to be put on top of pots, unlike a mortarium. This is second lid was too small to have fitted either the cremation jar or the mortarium to be used as a functional lid. So its purpose is not quite known as to why it's actually in there. But its presence and positioning within the jar and above the mortarium is particularly unusual, and again is something that we will be looking into further at analysis. Next slide. Thank you. Here we can see the vessels from the cremation in a slightly cleaner state, which provides more details on their forms, their states and their completeness. You can now see the white slip visible on the cremation jar, albeit it's a slightly patchy white slip. And on the central images here, you can see the mortarium, which was used as the kind of cover or lid to the jar. On the lower picture, you can see that the grits are quite worn away, showing that the vessel has been used. And you can also see by the colouring and the patches of sooting that it's been burnt. And this is also a common feature of that we often find with mortaria, potentially suggesting a secondary function of these vessels. It also appears from the images on the upper image of the mortaria that the flange seems to have been trimmed, as the breaks on it don't appear to be fresh, and this might suggest that it was altered to fit the cremation jar. The images on the right show the lid form that was recovered from the inside of the other vessels, and the flagon that was used as an accessory vessel for the cremation. Okay, next. So this leads us on to looking for potential parallels for such an unusual burial as this one, with the interesting elements of vessel selection and the vessel deposition. The use of mortaria in burial context is particularly uncommon, with none found at the Eastern Cemetery in London. And where I've been able to find examples of others, for example, at graves in Hungary, the vessels have actually been turned upside down and placed on the cremations more as lids, whereas our one is sitting upright and dipping into the jar. There's one parallel that I found from slightly closer, which is that of the Colchester vase burial group, which can be seen on the right of this slide. This was excavated in 1853 and has recently had further research undertaken on it, which is published in Britannia from 2024 in the form of 2 individual papers. As can be seen from the image, the mortaria on the right is also placed upside down as a cover or lid for the beautifully decorated beaker type vessel, which also had elaborate graffiti on it. Now, while this is different to our burial, there's also something quite similar to using that type of form as a lid. You can also see from the 2 flagons that the accessory vessel from the Colchester and the King's Place burials appear to be of similar forms, and from the images they are placed on the same side to the right of the main cremation vessel. So the similarities between the 2 of these these burial groups continues in that they date from a similar period, and that is of the late 2nd century. The Colchester burial potentially could date into the early 3rd, but it's that's based on the fact, I think, that there isn't a stamp on the mortaria, and unfortunately we don't have the full rim of our mortarium, so we don't know whether it was stamped or not, but there are definitely similarities between the 2 burial groups, and it's for our future analysis we'll look for any more and do some investigations. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Charlotte. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on our lovely osteologist, Dan. So over to you.
My name is Don Walker and I'm a human osteologist with Mola, and basically I'm going to talk a bit about the Roman burials at King's Place. And as a general feature of Roman Britain, we tend to get 2 types of burial: inhumations in what we might call normal graves, and cremation burials. So the burnt remains of individuals who've been cremated on a pyre. And in Roman London in particular, we tend to get a bit of a mixture. There is a general trend whereby the early Roman period there are cremations, and then that gives way to a degree by the later period to more inhumation. However, we do get a lot of burial grounds that have a mixture of both rites. And actually in London, we have some very, very early inhumations and some quite late cremations. So it really is a mixture of rites within Roman London. Now, I've just put up a slide of human skeleton there, just to remind you that there are going to be some images of human remains, skeletal human remains in this talk. Okay, Kat, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, the cremation burial. This was something that Charlotte was discussing earlier, and this sort of find is particularly interesting for us because it really is an example of deliberate filling of a vessel and then deliberate deposition at the end of a process, a funerary process, in this case, cremation. And it's not just the process that we want to reconstruct. We want to reconstruct a symbolism or ritual that accompanied this form of rite. If you think about it, the death of a relative is a very significant time in someone's life. So a very important period and a very important deposition, and accompanied by the funerary rites and the family. And we want to reconstruct exactly what was going on and what it meant to the people who were carrying out the burial. So what we have, first of all, is brought in from the field, this cremation burial, wrapped up, having been block lifted. The first thing that happens is it's taken for X-ray. And this gives us an idea of what might be inside the urn. In this case, we can see that there are some vessels, and we can also see that there is soil, and down the bottom there might be some hints of very, very small fragments of bone, but it's really not possible to say for sure in this case. One thing is for sure, there is something interesting within there. If it was just soil or just cremated human bone, the vessel would be brought into the osteologists, and they would carry out the micro excavation of the vessel. However, in this case, there's a bit more going on. So normally this would go to the conservators, because they are specialists in patiently excavating cremation vessels, especially if there are finds within. Say delicate finds or composite finds that need particular care and conservation. In this case, we didn't know exactly what was inside, so it did go to conservators, and they carried out excavation in spits, as Charlotte referred to. And what they do, they'll take about 2 or 3 centimeters of soil out at a time. They'll also actually divide the urn into quarters as they go down, and that will give them an even clearer picture of what's going on in each area of the urn, sort of like a 3D reconstruction, if you like, and drawings and or photographs are taken as they go down. Next slide, please, Kat. Okay, as we've seen, this is the cremation vessel after some of the soil has been removed. Actually, there was very little bone in this top half of the vessel, and this suggests that actually the covering it was provided with provided quite a lot of protection, and it seems that hopefully we've lost very little bone from the inside of the urn. You can see that the original lid has broken, and it still has the smaller lid within, slumping down into the vessel. Okay, Kat, next slide, please. Okay, this is further down with the removal of the smaller lid or secondary lid, and you can see the base of the mortarium that was inside. And at this level, just below the mortarium, we start to get a larger concentration of burnt human bone. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the layer below. This is the final layer, and actually it doesn't look like it because it hasn't been processed yet, but This was jam-packed full of bone. It's just that it's not clean and you can't really see it. But all of this was sent to our processing department, and they carefully washed the bone and bagged it up in spits and quadrants, ready for us to do the analysis of the burnt bone within. Okay, Kat. And this is what we're left with, the empty cremation vessel. The soil within would have been subject to changes in temperature and humidity, and this probably contributed to the fragmentation of the burnt bone within. The weight of the bone, well, when it was processed, the burnt bone came to about 1.2 kilograms, and this is a reasonable amount for a cremation. For example, if we look at modern cremations today, they normally produce around 1.6 to 2 kilograms for an adult individual. So what else can we say about the burial? Well, we're only at the initial assessment stage, but the colour and the fragmentation of the burnt bone can give us some clues to the pyre technology used in the cremation. And we can see from the some of the colour of the bone, we can tell sometimes what heat the bone may have reached in the pyre. So a lot of the bone was actually white or off-white in colour, and that suggests that it reached a temperature of at least 600 degrees centigrade, so very, very hot. However, we do have some other colours within the bone, and this tends to be mostly blue-grey coloured bone, and this suggests a slightly cooler temperature, perhaps about 300 or a little more, 300 degrees centigrade. And this suggests that some parts of the body were exposed to lower temperatures. This may have been just an area of the pyre that was burning less efficiently, or it may be perhaps the extremities, the feet, the hands that were on the edges of the pyre were less heated than some of the core areas of the body. But this is something we'll find out at the analysis when we take a closer look at the bone. Now, what we can say from the assessment was that we had bones from an adult individual. We can also say that it wasn't just one individual, there were two people in there. It seems that most of the fragments were from an adult, but we do have at least one fragment from a child, and this was the distal end of the humerus by the elbow, which hadn't fused yet. So this would be someone who was, say, aged less than 18 to 20 years of age. But we'll look at that further when we do the full analysis. We did also have very occasional fragments of burnt animal bone, and this may reflect possibly something to do with a mixture of bone once it was collected from the pyre, or possibly it was something that was put onto the pyre before it was set alight, possibly something to do with animal sacrifice or pyreside feasting, or possibly food gifts that accompanied the individual when they were burnt on the pyre. Now, as far as further work goes, we're going to look at the bone in detail, as I say, divided by spit and by quadrant, to get a closer look at what was going on inside the urn and how it was collected from the pyre and how it was laid into the cremation vessel, and in what order were certain parts of the remains put into the vessel first compared to other parts of the body. And we'll also look at the field record to see what other evidence there may be around the cremation burial. We'll look at the identity of the different areas of the bones, see if any parts of the body are missing, or if we've got certain areas that predominate within the assemblage. We might well do radiocarbon dating. With burnt bone, you can get a reasonable radiocarbon date from a fragment that we sample. We also have some elements from the skull, including a petrous temporal at the side of the skull, and this can be very useful for looking at the isotopic signature of an individual, and it may reveal information on childhood origins and give us an idea of where they were raised, possibly. Next slide, please, Kat. Right, we're moving from cremations to inhumations. We had 14 inhumations in total. That's what we found at the assessment. And of these, we had 12 adults and 2 subadults. One of the subadults, we could narrow the age down to about 7 to 12 years of age at death. Of the adults, we could establish the biological sex of 9 individuals, and there were 4 males and 5 females. And from the field records, we can say that at least 6 were probably buried in coffins. Next slide, please, Kat. Thanks. One thing we do initially when we're studying the skeletal assemblage is to look at the preservation and the completeness of each burial. And here we have it on a sort of sliding scale. To the right hand side, we have the more complete burials, those that were 80 to 95% complete or over. And then to the left hand side, we have those that were 5% or 10% complete, or 20% complete. So it gives you an idea of the spread of skeletal completeness over the site. Now, this could be for a number of reasons, but apparently there was quite a lot of post-Roman disturbance and modern disturbance on the site. So it seems that this is not a result of Roman interference in the cemetery, but rather later truncation and building works that has affected the survival of at least some of the individuals. Next slide, please, Kat. Okay, so this particular burial is unusual. The other photos of burials have been of individuals who are laid extended and supine, so facing upwards. This particular individual was face down, so quite an unusual burial. This was an adult male, had some osteoarthritis, some joint disease in the shoulder and also in the spine. There's no obvious reason why they were buried prone. It's something that's quite rare. In the Eastern Cemetery, we had several burials. Well, we had a large number of burials, but only a few were buried prone, about 3%. So something unusual is going on here. It could be perhaps by accident, if they were within some form of box or coffin, they could have been laid upside down by mistake. And certainly from the field evidence, it seems that they were supplied with some form of box or coffin. Alternatively, it may be that they were deliberately laid face down. And you do get some burials that are deliberately laid face down, and then you put, stones have been put over the top of them. And this has been interpreted perhaps as keeping them in the grave so they wouldn't rise from the grave after they were dead, or perhaps easing their way to the afterlife. But really, it's only theory. The strange thing about this particular example is that it was within a coffin or box, but if you look at the photograph, the left arm of the individual is raised up above the head, and it seems unlikely that if the box was accidentally turned around upside down, that the arm would be able to get up into that position. So I think it's tempting to say that perhaps this individual was deliberately laid prone in the coffin. You might notice that the skull is in a bit of an unusual position. There's no evidence that the skull was deliberately separated from the neck. This is probably a case of just the skull rolling off perhaps a cushion or some other object that was placed beneath it once the soft tissues had deteriorated. So just to finish off, just to say, I think further examination of the burial contents of this site will give us more clues to what was going on and how it fits into the local area. Really, this was an area within perhaps agricultural marginal land to the south of the main focus of the settlement. And as Eben said, on very near to a major road going northwards up into London. Evidence of health and disease will be something we'll be looking closely at when we do the analysis, and this will help us to understand the lived experience of the people who lived in Roman London at the time. Really the health benefits of urban life, such as access to markets, a consistent water supply, and improved sanitation. These may have been countered to a degree by overcrowding, pollution perhaps, and the spread of infectious disease and parasites within the Roman town. So the forthcoming full analysis of the burials will certainly further our knowledge of life in Roman London. And that's all from me. Thanks, Kat.
Brilliant. Thanks, Don. Very much looking forward to finding out more about the actual people that were living here almost 2,000 years ago now. So our final speaker for this afternoon, for this session, is the wonderful Dara. Dara is one of our small find specialists. So over to you.
Hello, hello. Yes, I am a small find specialist, and it was my very good privilege to have a look at the lovely finds from King's Place. If I do call it KPC, that's that's the site code for it. So that's usually how I converse with colleagues about it. So we had 45 registered finds from this site, and they, as you probably can tell, we've got some Roman activity on the site, which you can see quite nicely. The most noteworthy find from the Roman period for us was the stone mixing pallet, which you can see in the bottom left, which was used for the preparation of cosmetics, but also medicine. And actually linking to what Don was referencing, pallets found in Roman burials can also indicate a surgical association, so possibly a doctor, and those are the kinds of things that we do have a look at. You can also see that we've got a fragment of Roman blown glass. We also have a nice finger ring, which is quite simple but decorative. But you can also see that we have some Roman coins from the site, which are heavily corroded, which is actually quite typical for London because there's poor preservation of metals, and you might be able to see just in the top corner there that there's some kind of inference of a possible two soldiers, which is a numismatist type, and that's kind of one of the things that will support our dating throughout kind of the project. If you could go to the next slide, please, Kat. We have, or if you double click, I think. There you go. We've got a few medieval finds from this site, primarily a wire wound headed pin, and you can see the close up there, and they will have kind of had a smaller piece of wire wound around the head and then crimped it. But that is a style of pin that can be seen throughout many different periods, and so the phasing will be able to support whether this is truly medieval, which they have a peak in the 13th and 14th centuries, and that is also when the buckle is actually dating to, which would have been a shoe buckle, which is quite nice. Very low on the medieval at the moment, but what I'll primarily be talking about, next slide please, Kat, is quite an interesting assemblage of fountain pens. And so this really shows the variety of finds that we do get from archaeological sites. The majority of the assemblage from this site is actually post-medieval. So kind of the Tudors and onwards, but we have 19 of which are associated with kind of the Victorian period, and yet we have this really interesting peak in fountain pens, which I think is quite a nice link to the future use of the site being student accommodation, and having writing equipment is quite lovely. Next slide, please. So the most complete pen fragment that we have is actually a ripple red fountain pen, and you can see just on the corner there we've got the lever mechanism, which, next slide please, is actually patented in 1908, apologies, and so that gives us quite a nice tight dating for the material. Next slide please. But actually what's really quite interesting about the most complete fragment is this inscription, and it reads "The unique pen, number 65, made in England." And actually this is quite frustrating, because when you put unique fountain pens 20th century into Google, many pens come up, because we love using unique as a selling point, as something that's quite special, which just kind of it makes it a bit challenging. However, digging a bit deeper, trying to find what the possible link for this was, we were able to find that it was actually associated with the Union Pen Company, which was started up in the 1930s, was owned by a man called Samuel Epstein. But what's actually quite interesting is that these pens were made in Rains Park, which is Greater London, and New Haven, which is East Sussex, which is nowhere near where our site is, really. Next slide, please. You can see that these kinds of pens, this style, is actually really quite common. This is a Waterman's catalogue entry from 1925 and 28, showing the kind of different colour options that you can get, which are shown from our example on site. Next slide, please. And this kind of continues with the other more complete fragments that we've got. This is actually a chased design, which is also very common for the 20th century. They're introduced in 1900. It's an incredibly easy way of when working the pen to add design in as you're going. And next slide, please. What is most interesting about this kind of funky assemblage of fountain pens is that we've got blanks in the assemblage as well. And as I've just mentioned, the standard for creation for pens of this type from this period was on the lathe, and you really associate wooden kind of manufacture with lathes or bowls or things like that. But actually, it's really quite a intricate process. But the fact that we've got almost complete pens, a complete lid and barrel, and then we've got these unused blanks and then a partially lathed blank is quite interesting. Next slide, please. And this is kind of you can see the manufacturing level that you would have had, usually a rectangular block referred to as a blank. You would have then drilled the top hole into that so that you could affix it to it. And as we've seen from the image previously, we've got that blank generally a circular section instead of a rectangular or square one. But we know that these are almost kind of mid process for creating these pens. And finding those on site is actually quite interesting, because it creates this a narrative of what happened and why are the pens there. Was a resident nearby a worker for one of these companies, and kind of different research avenues we can go down in the future, really. But this was really kind of associated this as will hopefully be looked at more at analysis, and it's one of the things where we've got the kind of basics and an understanding of what we've got, and hopefully we'll be able to tie it to both the burials and the ceramics, and then also the stratigraphic analysis. I know I've gone through this quite quickly, apologies. It's quite a whip tour of the finds. Next slide, please. And you can kind of see all of the photos that I've shown you today. All of these finds are documented as to where they come from site, but a lot of them are actually unstratified or in later phases. And so looking at it and seeing exactly how later phases will have disturbed earlier archaeology is actually quite interesting. And looking at exactly what you find and where is one of the really kind of interesting elements of what I'll be writing on later down the line. That is all from me. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dara. Very much a whistle-stop tour through the various finds that we have. Thank you all again for joining. Thank you so much to our specialists, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.